So this time there's open time for public forum in case anyone is here that wishes to speak to anything not on the agenda. Anything on the agenda, you'll have your opportunity to address. Is there anyone that would like to discuss something not on the agenda?
On the agenda?
Yes, it is. Yes. Okay. Approval of the meeting minutes, June 3rd. Any adjustments?
So I realized June 13th was the previous meeting. It was supposed to be October, so we might have to postpone that till the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was something was odd there.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Appoint chair and vice chair.
Yeah. So currently we don't have a vice chair, and I think it's been over a year since.
Right, I think it's been over a year since we've appointed either, so I think it's part of the start of the new year. We should appoint both the chair and vice chair. So,
Okay,
and leave it up to the flood board to
are
nominate.
there
and hash it out.
nominations for chair?
I'll nominate Bob Bundy.
Second.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard.
I second that.
Are there any other nominations?
I nominate Nathan for vice.
Yeah, I think we need to vote on chair first.
Very good point.
So I will accept that nomination. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, I accept. Nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Nathan Blomgren.
Is there a second?
I second. This is Ramon.
I'll second nomination for Nathan for vice chair.
Okay, are there any other nominations? All in favor, say aye.
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 Nate, you're on board.
All right.
Okay. Discussion items, Public Works, 22 accomplishments, 23 work plan.
So good, Chris.
Yeah, we're gonna switch the order around a little bit because I think most people are here for the next item.
Okay, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd like to request shifting item A down to after Marina Village levy, but ahead of the CRS update.
Okay. Item B, winter 22-23 storm related issues.
Okay. Okay, let's see, there we go. So we're gonna go through several issues we've had this winter because of all the rain. So the first one, up on Endeavor Drive, there was a fairly large landslide. Here you can see it from the bottom and the top. So that's right on the edge of Ring Mountain. And we were able to come in shortly after and secure it, tarp it off. And so it hasn't slid anymore. And I think the only real damage done was that a lot of material ended up going down the storm drain. So probably end up having to clear that out later. But for now it's secure, and we're looking into getting FEMA reimbursement to do permanent restoration this summer. So
Yeah, and to provide some additional background and context, so the state declared an emergency starting on December 27th, and I think it lasted about a month. The county and then also town of Corte Madera followed suit. So this does allow us to go after reimbursement for incidents of damage that are related to those atmospheric river conditions. So this is one site that did sustain damage and likely will result in several $100,000 worth of repairs.
okay. So the next one, Paloma Drive, maintenance and failed pipe. So let's see, the top right one's blocked. It's this red pipe up here. During several of the storms, the pipe became blocked and started to flood this corner. And when we came in, we brought a contractor in to dig it up, and the pipe was so old that it had just collapsed and there was basically nothing left there. So they did an emergency repair, and we need to come back and do a little bit more work. And we're hoping to get FEMA funding for that as well, but that one is less likely. And then on the left side, outlined in blue, is the main storm system that drains a lot of the neighborhood. And luckily we caught this before the storm started, but we were working in the neighborhood and a contractor mentioned that there was a lot of debris in the pipe, and we had our maintenance crews come in and vector it out, and it ended up taking, I think, 5 days, and there was 30 tons of material in the pipes. So obviously it hadn't been done in a very long time. And I think all the construction in this neighborhood and all the water main breaks have contributed a lot to the material ending up in the storm drain. So hopefully moving forward, we'll maintain it a little bit more often to make sure it's clear, because that's one of those things you don't know until it's completely full and starts flooding. So in the same neighborhood, the El Camino ditch maintenance. So just parallel with El Camino Drive, there's a open ditch that drains the left side of El Camino over here. And we just did a bunch of work to fix the pipes here. So now that it was draining for a while, and then it started to back up again. And we realized that this ditch has become overgrown and is not allowing water to drain out of the system. So another issue that we're going to have to deal with. And I think it's a little more tricky because it's definitely considered sensitive habitat. And this is going to become more widespread because we have a lot of open channels that haven't been dredged or maintained in a really long time. So we've noticed over here on the other side of El Camino, the pipes are like partially submerged because the bottom of the channel has risen up over time, which just lowers capacity. So we're just putting on our list to deal with at a later date.
So these are items that obviously we find out about as we have rain events. This is also stuff that we would try to flag and diagnose as part of our ongoing storm drain master plan. But obviously now that we know it, we got to add this to the work plan, but it's really going to involve a lot of regulatory permits before we can get in there. It's not as easy as just hiring a contractor to go out there and grade it. We got to get all the necessary approvals. So it's actually a long and tedious process. So, but we will initiate that.
So for that one, do you know at which elevation that is influenced by tides?
This channel actually is not influenced by tides because it ends up going to San Clemente pump station. So unless there is a floodgate that can be opened at San Clemente Creek, and that it would be, but I think that's closed most of the winter. So just ends up getting pumped out. San Clemente Creek.
Yeah. So
It is influenced by tides if it gets pumped out and has nowhere to go to.
Well,
hold on.
Oh.
Yeah, we need to follow a process. So we can answer questions at the appropriate time and then we can circle back. But yeah, happy to.
Yeah, so the pipe goes underneath El Camino and then it dumps into the swale behind the shopping center, Aegis and the shopping center, and then goes down and is picked up by the pump station. We're calling it San Clemente, which is on Madera del Presidio, that one. And so that picks that up, and that's not tide related because that tide gate has been permanently, I thought it was permanently closed, but it's open in the summer sometimes.
Yes, when it's functioning, but we've had a lot of problems with it lately, so it remains closed most of the time.
And so that then, just pumps into San Clemente Creek right at the fire station.
Yeah, it ends up pumping it to the same spot where the tide gate is. So
yeah, the big box upright culvert there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of those gates are open in the summer. We don't have the concerns we have in the winter about heavy precipitation. And the tidal actually helps keep the odors down, and it also reduces a lot of the algae growth and other things. So
Okay, good.
Okay, so then this item was kind of more general, but we had some really high king tides and then a lot of rain in end of December and early January. So these were some pictures that different people sent in. On the left, this is standing on the Marina Village levee looking down. So the water, I believe this was when it was 7.2 foot king tide. So there was still about, I mean, I wasn't there, but looks like about 18 inches of room between the top of the levee and the water. So it got pretty close, but there's still a little bit of room there. And then on the top right, this is Golden Hine during the king tide. Obviously it's sunny out, so this was just water that was coming in between the houses.
Our water did not come between the houses on that day. Through the sewers thing.
I beg to differ, actually,
Yeah.
because this is the 21st.
I believe so.
Yeah, there's definitely water coming through the houses.
My house is right there. It did not come through my house right there.
Yeah, we're going to try we're going to open it up for public comments on things and really want to go with the process of having the presentation, and then there'll be time for everybody to come up and make comments in regard to that.
So yeah, we'll be sharing several sets of photos, right? It's good to see kind of what's happening on high tides on sunny days, to know kind of what is isolated from a tide impact side, and then also to see what happens when tides plus rains happen at the same time and see what that looks like. So these are all just good observations, good data points, just kind of overall improve our understanding of what's going on, and hopefully inform how best to solve it over time.
So yeah, board member Tagaki was sent a presentation of her own photos she took. So
Sure. Just
yeah, let me know when to switch.
Yeah, so these are just some observations. I got some of these from other neighbors as well, and kind of what I think was going on, and not perfect information, just kind of put together with different data sources. So next slide, please. So just for people who might not know exactly what the system is, and I'm sure either RJ or Chris could explain it better, but so there's the north part there, right? The storm drain is kind of that little gap. I'm sorry, it's the sanitary sewer pump station is the gap. Mike, you're right where the letter 45 is, right? So there's a small collection system there, right? I understand that that goes basically by gravity out to the bay. So if there is just a rain event, no high tide, it'll just flow out. And then on the lower part, you'll have in purple, that was now the Cove School, right? We are at the little triangle where it says 25, where there's now a pump station. And there's now a slot drain that goes north of that 25 past to about 311 Golden High, maybe something like that. And so, you know, a lot of the water collects rainwater, right? Collects from the west side, from the neighborhoods along lives courts and things, and from the school as well. And then it goes in any normal condition, it would go by gravity into the pump station, I believe, the wet well, and then gets pumped out.
Yeah, correct.
Right. So this is kind of an old version. The pump station is new, but it's intended, my understanding is, to function when there's a high tide, not too high, but high enough that when it rains in the neighborhood, it will pump out, right? And keep the streets clear. Right, that's the way it's intended to function. It's not intended to function on really huge events, whether it's a really big rainfall event or a big rainfall on a king tide event. So that's just kind of roughly what the system's like. The other parts are the things coming from up the hill off westward, and they kind of all end up draining there into Triangle Marsh. So I think I got it generally right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm an engineer, so, and then the pump station is right at the foot of my driveway. So I look at it very carefully and all that. So, and the guys have done a great job with kind of keeping up with, you know, wet level wells and all sorts of stuff, because things do go out. So, okay, next slide, please. So these were some extreme tide events on the 5th. Actually, the 4th was also a big tide. I talked to Mike Golden just this morning. And roughly, and this is the San Francisco station. And I think, Chris, you said that if you look at the Richmond station, it's even higher. So the blue line is the predicted tide. All right. During the atmospheric river events, the waves offshore were huge, and it was all pushing up the water surface. So the red line was more or less the predicted tide. I mean, sorry, the actual tide at the gate. This is the Golden Gate Bridge. The elevations don't change that much between the Golden Gate Bridge and Corte Madera Creek, which there's another station, and it just lags about an hour. So that high tide, because I was out there, you'll see some pictures at about like 9:45 and about 11. So this is about 11 high tide, and it ended up being about 7.71 at the gate. And I think, Chris, you said at Richmond, it was actually more like 8 feet. Yeah. So all this says is in this particular event, there was a really big waves offshore, and they were totally pushing the water surface up and causing even a higher, because this is not a big high tide. It was like a 6.2. So were it not for those waves, we wouldn't have experienced nearly the water surface elevation that we did. Right. So that's just an observation. It was fairly similar on the 4th in terms of how much more, although I think the actual high tide was lower by about maybe a quarter foot, like 4 to 6 inches or something like that. So the 4th was a slightly smaller high tide than it was on the 5th. So that's just kind of, some data. I guess we can go on the next slide. So as I talked to Mike at 3:03 this morning. He said, his observation was at 3:03 Golden Hide, the high tide on the 4th didn't actually come into the garage. So it was kind of like what was different about it. On the 5th, the little yellow box and, kind of my observations about, the water surface at the highest point was somewhere north of 7.7, could have been like somewhere between 7.7 and 8 feet probably, right? And it certainly went up the driveways on both sides of Golden Hind, right? I also did see it coming, the little yellow arrow at the bottom, kind of right, that's our backyard, we'll have some pictures of that. And it basically came over a little landscape berm we have there. And it also comes through where the green arrows are between the houses kind of in my area. And I know my area, Mike, I know that what you experienced might be similar, but a little different. So just, and then I know at 303 and 299, these are folks I talked to, they said that they had somewhere in the neighborhood about 6 inches of water in their garages. So, and I believe that there was actually also kind of a high rain event at about that time. I kind of remember walking out there, and I think it was raining pretty hard. So it may have been a short duration, high intensity rain, which may also be why the pump station was also overwhelmed. It was higher than, I know there was a lot of rain on the 4th. I actually wasn't here, but I looked at some of the data. So the rain actually had kind of more total rainfall for the day, but I kind of remember there being, a fair bit of rain at the time the very high tide was happening. And then to Chris's point, the king tide, was also an event, but mostly I observed it coming in by the sanitary sewer pump station, right? And then I also did observe it coming in between the houses between 323 and 319, which is our house and our neighbor, and then the next set of neighbors past that. So we saw some of the water coming up there. So that's just some information about, what we experienced and what I observed. Next slide. So yeah, this is 9:48 a.m. The water's coming up. It's over the sidewalk and, coming up on the driveway a little bit. That's on the 5th, and it was raining. You can kind of see that, raining fairly hard. Next slide. Also on the 5th, this is our neighbor. That's at 10:38. So about 40 minutes later, and the water's definitely come up higher. It's coming up our driveway underneath the cars. And then she took this picture kind of down the whole street. So, it was up into driveways, sometimes going into garages and such. So I did not try to go out there and with my boots or anything. So, and then next slide. So this was just, this is our rain gauge. It's not great data, but it shows you on the bottom of the date. So kind of in the middle of the day around on the 5th, it wasn't as much rain, but I certainly remember it being raining pretty hard. And I wasn't here on the 4th, so I couldn't really tell you, but so a little bit of data, a little more granular than just what happened in the day. So let's see. And then just, this is as high as it's ever been in our front yard. It's almost to the fence. You can see kind of down the street that red car is, kind of up almost to the bumper and up the driveways. And the next slides, I think, are just our backyard. And it came over, we have a little landscape berm, and it definitely kind of came over that. And then it goes up the side, between the houses and out into the driveway, and it kind of covered the lowest course of our deck. So it was a lot of water. So anyways, those are kind of my observations. I know it sounds like there's more, slides and photos and such. And, I think we're all just trying to understand kind of the nature of the problem, and then, where to go from here.
Sashi, thank you very much. So at this point, the flood board has the opportunity to ask questions. If you have anything really pertinent, ask it at this time, although I'd really like to open it to the public to hear comments that from the people that have lived it and experienced it over the years. Did any of the board members have any comments to make? Yeah, I'll just make one observation, is that the pump station at your house is, when it's working correctly, it can really move a lot of water, because I've been there when water was spilling over the easement, and it was keeping up with it, but it just can't. So I think it can keep up with the rainfall that can come, but it just can't keep up with the bay.
Right. The amount of tide water that comes over is,
Yeah.
It goes out at 10x and it's coming in over at 100x. I mean, it just can't keep up. All you're doing is just pumping against yourself. So, and it was never intended to do that. It was never designed for that.
So I'd like to open it up to the public. In general, we have 3 minutes. We'll give a good deal of leeway. Would like to hear comments, concerns that you have, as well as thoughts on, what you think we might be able to do to rectify the situation. It's open. Please state your name, address, make sure the mic is on.
I'll go first. Hey there, I'm Mike Burke. Nice to meet everybody that I haven't met before. I live at 291 Golden Heights. So I'm right on the right next to the pump station there, the higher one that the wastewater pump station. There is no great pump station. That was part of the problem. So I certainly experienced that. I went through a couple years ago, raised the house, raised the garage, certainly get out of the floodplain. But I still have a foot and a half of water, like on the pit there, to try to get from my house into where I need to go. So I need like shorts to like get out there. And so it's quite a lot of water. It really comes down to, I think, two problems we have. One is that when we get these really high tides, the water will come in. Now I've added fill so it doesn't come through my yard anymore, but through the pump station, through the houses on both sides, through the whole neighborhood, it's going to still come through and then into the street. And in that case, because there is no pump, there is nowhere for it to go until the tide recedes. And so the fact that we don't have a berm, we don't have anything back there, a berm would be one way to solve that. Maybe a berm or something behind our property line along the line would be one way to solve part of the problem, which is the water coming in from the bay. The other problem, as I see it, is that when it rains and we get water into the road, if we get even a modest high tide, the gravity-fed storm drain system that's next to the house, that's right at the pump station, it's got nowhere to go. And so it just pools there often for hours until the tide lowers down enough for there to be high enough pressure head for the water to push out of the system. So I think even a modest pump would help some in those circumstances. But I think if we had another pump station similar to what's Sachi's house, or a better design, because it sounds like that, but sometimes inefficient. That would help with a lot of the flooding. So one is to try to keep the water out from coming in from the bay, and when we get rainwater, to have some way to push it out, because right now it just sits. Good. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
I request 1 3 minutes.
Okay,
First, I'd like to show a video of the water coming through at the pump station. I don't know if anybody's seen that. I did try to send it around
I saw that.
email wise. Have you guys seen that? Have you seen that? So I'm gonna show this video just so you can pass it around. It is water coming through at the 7-foot-8 tide. And for whatever reason. All right, I'm gonna get this set up. I will send it, I'll resend it around. I know, Chris, you said you saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Well, yeah, so I live, Mike Vogel, I live at 287 Golden Pine, I'm immediately north of the Pine Pump Station. When they redid that pump station way back when, they dug channels down the 2 property lines to put in a fence. But they never filled, all they did is fill those channels back in with gravel. So those are 2 channels that now water immediately runs right through there. So on a 6'4" tide, it looks like water's coming through my property into the street. It's actually coming right down the property line and then flowing through the city's yard into the street. Mike's house is now built up at about 3.5 feet, 3 feet, something like that. It takes a little longer to get to him. It doesn't come through in a 6'4" tide, but at about a 6'8" tide, it's coming right down his fence line and then drains into the city yard and then into the street. At the 7'8" tide, and probably at about a 7'7", it was coming over the back wall of the city yard. So that means that pavement is about 7'6", maybe 7'7".
That huh?
It might be 7'6". It doesn't come through at 7'2" at the back of that yard. It's about a 7'7", maybe somewhere in that range, I'm guessing. On that number. My deck is 9 feet. My deck has never been underwater. It was supposed to be underwater in 97. We had an 8.1 tide. I'm using Richmond Station on the 5th. That water was coming through my house, through Mike's house, through Manny's house. Went to Nathan's parents' house, all the way through your house, across the street to your house. It's about 2 inches of water at the crown of the street on Golden Hind and Epitide, 14 inches minimum at the front of the city lot there, because that planter is 14 inches and that planter is underwater on the high tide, on those flood tides. My view is the city needs, if the city could build a berm across their back property line, right at the fence, at about 2 feet above what it currently sits, we're gonna solve a lot of water problems, because then I can tie in across my property at 2 feet, Mike can tie in at 2 feet against his, Manny can tie in at 2 feet across his, then we can go up the road across your back fence line. That's not a 13-foot wall that everybody complained about 6-9 months ago when you were trying to build a fence or wall back there. So if we can build a 2-foot solid berm, because Manny's new foundation did not let water in his spot. That was a solid wall, right? So that worked. Because his interior was lower than the exterior and there was no water. So and I think that's only 6 inches wide. So 6-inch wide, 2-foot solid cement wall across everybody's back line from Sachi's house and maybe even Meg's house, all the way down, would solve all this water coming through the properties. Okay? That's number one, dramatic. Or that's the first, I think that's the first thing that will help a lot of things. Second thing is, Mike was saying, that catch basin on Epitide Golden Pine, there's 4 little sewers there, or 3 sewers there. Sachi's picture showed those 3 sewers plus running down a little bit on running up towards Nathan's house on Golden Pine. But in reality is that's just the sewer line that's in. That's not really, the water flows.
You're talking about the storm drain.
Storm drain, sorry. So I'd like to see, are there more storm drains that actually drain to that corner? Because I know you've slotted much of ebb tide the other direction. You've slotted Staghound over there. I'm curious as to where those slot storm drains run to. Do they run to Sachi's house? Do they run to my house? Do they run to the corner on Golden Pines and Staghound or whatever that is? I think what I've noticed in the past 26 years is that since you put in the slot drains, it's fantastic for the rest of the neighborhood, but we do get more water in our corner. Part of that is nature, if heavy rains, that's changed, right? But all the water that's coming from Golden Pine, all the water that's coming from Eptide, all the water that's coming from 311 this way, or whatever the slot drain goes towards Sachi's, whatever that house is that then comes towards us, we get all that water. That has no place to go at above about a 4.6 tide, it won't drain. My suggestion, we build a catch basin under the ground there. Cisterns as such. Let that water drain underneath. Put a pump in that cistern so that then you can then pump it out over the new wall and we'll solve, I think, both problems. Right? Lots of money, yes, I realize. But $2 million pump station in Sachi's only really solves the rain, doesn't solve the floods. We need to do both.
Thank you. Others?
Oh, I got one more thing to say.
Yeah.
Which Jason, I think, will agree to. When we have 2 inches of water in the middle of the street, and you have public works drivers and UPS drivers and people trying to take their kids to school, driving down the street at 30 miles an hour, even at 5 miles an hour, it creates a wake, which then flows into the garages. Ask Mike, ask the guy at Mike Bolden, that's you. When you get an extra 2 inches of water into your garage, that can take out the motor in your dryer or your freezer. I experienced that in '97. My dryers are now potentially higher than the floor of my garage. But Eric lost a freezer on January 5th because the water gets pushed into his garage. Even an extra 2 inches is dramatic. Please have the public works guys put out there a detour so that they don't drive between Eptide and the school. Because it just ruins it.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, hi, Jason Broderson with 314. I just want to double the idea of some sort of security measure, some sort of alert. I think he and I went out there a couple of years ago and tried to get people to stay out.
The town manager called the police on us.
Yeah, so I think the bottom line is, it makes good sense for everyone to stay away. It doesn't last a long time. It's usually our garage did get a lot of inflow, and we're on the other side of the street. And it was primarily because of cars. I was watching that higher than it has in the past. But it seems like it's from a safety perspective. Some sort of, it's just a slow side or something, just something. And I don't know what roads it would go on, obviously right past the code school. Not that many parents that drive their code school now. It doesn't get a lot, you watch that frequently. It doesn't get a lot of traffic from Golden High. Anyways, I just echo the feeling of some sort of slowdown. When it's that high.
Thank
Not
you.
the crown either. It just has to get to where when cars drive through it there. Trucks and the speed has a lot to do with it.
Thank you, Jason. So are anybody on Zoom that has a hand raised, Chris? Can you tell?
Yeah, we have 3.
Hi,
We hear you.
I'm Corinne at 303. Mike is my husband, and we are Zooming in tonight. We moved here 2 years ago, and so the floods are all relatively new to us, but obviously a huge concern since our garage took on the 6 inches. And I'm interested in both of the proposed solutions, but I'm curious, who pays for them? Like, does it fall on the homeowners, or is it like a city thing? Is it a government thing? What is it?
We'll address, so you can throw some questions out and then we'll
Okay.
address them at the close of public hearing.
Thank you.
Chris, anybody else with a hand up?
James.
Hello,
We hear you?
Mr. Bundy? Dr.
Yes.
Bundy? This is Jim Andrews. Several years ago, I remember sending the Flood Control Board some documentation on this. I don't know what the correct name for it, but basically it's long tubes that you fill with water.
Water bladders.
Correct. Given the regulatory problems with putting in a permanent berm and, the hoops we have to jump through there, would it be possible, but at Thanksgiving, to deploy those temporary berms around the neighborhood until, say, Easter, just to try and isolate out the bay flooding? And then we can sort of see what the issues are, whether it's the rain or whether it's inflow from the bay, and sort of do that on a temporary basis for a few years until we come up with a permanent solution to keep these neighborhoods dry.
Thank you. Good suggestion.
Okay.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening. This is Eric Bitzo at 299 Golden Hind Passage. And my wife and I, Teal, have been here for almost 3 years now. And I just wanted to show support for exploring the options that I think both of the mics have offered, including in addition to the one that was just offered. Basically, it's really shocking to me sometimes that you see slot drains around the neighborhood, but not at our part of the street where the water is pooling. And I don't know if that's a chicken or egg problem, but just sort of at a basic level, we're lacking that sort of drainage down towards our end of the street, and that's not even accounting for the high tides and the berm that I do think we should explore as a community. And, Corinne raises a great point about who's going to pay for it. But as an initial matter, I understand how long these things take. And I would hope that we can all get together so that we can start studying the problem now, given the processes that I know this body is subject to. But I just, again, wanted to echo the concerns that I've heard and offer support for exploring them, forthwith.
Thank you. Any more?
I think that was it.
Okay. So we'll turn it back, to staff here to respond to some of these. I've heard requests to put in a pump station for the storm drain. And part of that is because the check valve system that was installed has never seemed to work correctly. So there was a request about a pump. There was a request about a 2-foot berm that would go across the either back of the property line or back behind the houses, maybe depending on what was what was on the property. There was a request for slot drains that would help with the ponding that comes after the rains, or after, really even after the extreme high tides, when that water gets trapped on the street. And then there was a question about who's going to pay for this, and would water bladders be a temporary solution to some of this. So just easy questions. And then we'll turn.
I think Mike had one other question to raise in terms of what else drains towards the.
I was going to suggest that we pull that slide back up that Sachi had showing the storm drains.
And Bob had one more thing to add, which is the cistern. So it's
Set up the mic.
a much larger catch basin, because the catch basin that sits right between Mike's house and my house has been broken for 20 years, which is part of the problem. There's a crack in it. But if you put in a substantial catch basin in that, at maybe one, maybe three, one at each corner there, or one giant one, that would help alleviate quite a bit.
It's a question of pump station versus giant reservoir.
Well, giant reservoir with a smaller.
Gentlemen.
Okay. All right. Well, first off, I just want to say I appreciate everyone coming. I really do. We appreciate your feedback. This is obviously a challenging situation, and but happy to go through and respond as much as I can. We do have to be a little careful about kind of how much in terms of future planning we get into, just given we're talking about an item about winter storms, and but let me get into what I can here. See where to start. So a couple things that are happening right now. So we're in year 2 of a storm drain master plan that will have a comprehensive document about our vulnerabilities in town, and we'll speak to from an engineering perspective, and prioritize where we should fund projects to minimize our vulnerability to floods. And so we're basically rounding the corner on year 1, heading into year 2. It's designed to be a 2-year process. So that is underway, and that will be a very useful document as we move forward. Secondly, the other thing that council has supported in discussions recently is really doing a survey amongst shoreline neighborhoods, really to get down to who is in support of infrastructure improvements that will help against things like sea level rise and flooding, because for those that were participating in some of the prior work for climate adaptation assessment and other things, we got some mixed messages. We had a petition that many of you are familiar with that had 400 or 500 people saying this is a terrible idea. Why would you pursue these type of improvements? So we're trying to present neutral data and information in hopes of getting neutral feedback, which will then help kind of propel things forward, kind of rewrite some of those past campaigns that I believe were kind of based on some misinformation. Separate to that, talking specifically about kind of some of the things that are going on, and just hypothetically talking about, maybe let's talk about some of the lower hanging fruit, just signage to address wake. Happy to look into that. Just keep in mind, whatever we put out there, we have to, for the detour, are we saying that kind of typically means everyone goes that route, not just some people? I mean, it means people who live on the street too. So we need to come up with the appropriate signage, and what, maybe it's something road closed to through traffic or something along those lines, where you're sending the right message to the through traffic folks, but you're kind of opening the door for people who live within that segment that is inundated. So happy to look into that, and we can, if we don't have those signs on hand, we can order them and get those kind of as part of our typical practice. The other one, talking about things just in general, talking about projects, and I'm kind of going to respond to some of these in hypothetical. Even things like temporary measures such as a water bladder, you really can't just implement them without going through permitting and CEQA compliance. Maybe we do some initial consult and someone says, you know, that's fine, but you're basically creating, you're deflecting water or preventing it from going where it otherwise would go, and that's a consideration for a lot of things. And so that's a challenge. Separate of that is this concept of a series of private projects that work together is also for a public agency very challenging. In particular, you know, we've heard ideas where you have a berm in between houses, but then you're relying on someone's house to act as a barrier when it's really not designed to withstand water. Or perhaps I see Mike shaking his head, but I guess it's a berm in the back. But as a public agency, we struggle and really have challenges with relying on something that is privately built and constructed. Typically, the way that a project like that happens is a project is defined that has community support. You know, we'll take funding aside, that's part of the determination of community support and determining whether it's what share or what can be funded. But generally with barriers like this, you would have some sort of established easement and an engineered design. And they all work together because they're all integrated as one engineered project. Public agencies, one of the things that we really try to do is working on private property, because there's a saying that's no good deed goes unpunished. And the reality is too often you're trying to do a good thing, you're putting town resources and funds, and it just takes one person to take advantage of the situation and kind of ruin it for everyone. So it really needs to be a project that hits all those things. Fully engineered, it really would probably have to be a public project. It'd have to be established right away, meaning some sort of, you know, we'd have to have the land rights via having the property in full or an easement to do such a feature. It would have to go through the full CEQA compliance. It would have to go through any environmental permitting. You know, there's several we're right on the bay, so there's going to be several agencies that are going to speak to that. Any pump station that is pumping out water that's going to trigger permits, right? Just scouring sensitive habitat is potentially a take against many of those resources. So, you know, I wish it was so simple to just kind of whipping up a project and, you know, dumping some fill and creating some sort of berm, but it's really not. I'm not saying that it's something that the town isn't open to. You know, we want to do good for our community, but it more likely will have to follow that kind of standard process. And so really right now we have, like I said, the storm drain master plan that's really going to be the backbone of kind of setting things up, getting the support from the community, and then potentially with approvals from council and whatnot, this gets prioritized and this potentially could turn into some sort of design project. So that's kind of the hypothetical on that.
Archie, can I follow up on that one?
Let's hold on just a minute. Let's finish this and we'll have some comments up here and I'll open it up again.
All right, thanks, Bob.
Chris, what else?
I can take one. I think Mike asked where the storm system goes around ebb tide, and I mean, you can see here, it's a pretty small isolated system. I don't think this map is 100% correct because
It's
it's,
from 2011, so.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I found. but-
yeah. And unfortunately, I think that's the last time we updated our maps. So we're in the process of improving them as part of our storm master plan, but right now this is what we got. So, but yeah, I think they may have added slot drains around here and additional storm drains, but I don't believe it goes much farther than this. So it's
No,
capturing.
they're all south of there, I believe.
South and east.
And
Oh,
on that.
Oh,
further up
down
on
this
the-
side.
Is there grading or topology shows sort of what drains to that point?
Yeah, can you show do we have the watershed?
You know, I don't know, was that, I mean, this kind of shows it, so. What I'm seeing here is there's sort of a high point here and this is draining this way, it looks like, maybe,
That's about right.
it's hard to tell.
Probably are, we're like in the between, like you said, from our house either flows down that way or it flows down this way, so.
Okay,
Our house is kind of, we still get flooding, but not as extremely, we're at the higher point.
okay, so then, yeah, there may be a high point somewhere right here. Where some of the water is going this way, some of it's going this way to the pump station.
Range from 311 south, but nothing. I think the people on Zoom and Mike would benefit dramatically from slot drains from 311 north up to the pump station.
Well, yeah, slot drains help a lot with water ponding, but I mean, until we deal with, you know, tidal water coming in between houses and issues like that, it's not really going to help with like water flooding the street.
Once on the drain. go
Right.
somewhere.
It,
So at least there's.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it would, a slot drain would only fully function if you had it connected to a pump station and you prevented water from entering. And so that becomes, I'm not saying it's not insurmountable, but that really this becomes a large investment in infrastructure, you know, several millions of dollars just to kind of start tackling this. So
Slot drain on those 6 houses would be the same slot drain on any other street. It would help on 270 days out of the year when there's a pond sitting there on a dry day.
right, yeah, so it just depends what we're trying to solve here, right? Are we trying to solve?
And then the water coming in is complete different issue,
Right.
but I think a lot of people are concerned with the ponding, so that would be that.
And so the reason, if you go to Marina Village, the reason slot drains work out there is because all of that gravity's down to a retention basin, which is much lower. So even in the rains, it has positive slope, but here, you know, I don't know if where the discharge is for a lot of those storm network systems, but probably doesn't take more than a few feet of tide before it's not flowing out
Right, but
effectively.
The slot drain would at least let the street drain at low tide every day.
Yeah, let me have the staff finish off and ask for comments from the board and I'll open it back up again.
There was a question, who pays for the storm and flood projects?
So generally, in the past, and this is kind of a different animal, but you know, I think town has funded, you know, the bulk of flood infrastructure projects. I think just what makes this a slightly different conversation is just the ongoing things about potential sea level rise and kind of that natural hazard. You know, this is where I'm not sure if this is the appropriate forum to really get into just kind of what's going on in some of the other parts of Marin, but you know, there are other agencies and county and others considering overlay districts and certain things to create zones that have different requirements, but maybe that also have assessments that maybe fund certain these projects. But There's also flood districts, right, that fund a lot of levee work, Santa Venetia and others, right? They all pay into a flood district, which then can flood levees. So I mean, those are all different options, but really it's there needs to be a lot of analysis on what the community benefits are. And then ultimately those decisions go to council on kind of how to go about zoning, funding, proportionate share, et cetera.
So let me go ahead and get some comments from the board and everybody's thoughts on what we've heard, what the issues are and what we might try to do. And I'll open it back up for additional comments. Nate, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming in. I'll just make an observation that I'm glad we're talking about a common source of data using the Richmond tide gauge or the San Francisco gauge, because we're going to be talking about solutions that are in the range of 1/10 of a foot as far as resolution goes. And so we can get that with those gauges and they're repeatable. We have a long record, and we can figure out what the increases above predicted tides are. I'm glad we're talking about the flooding that comes from the rain and the runoff, and we're talking about our storm drain master plan right now. So that's the other side of this puzzle where there's seawater coming in from one side and rain from the other. You have to understand what's going on both sides in the exact elevations. And I just invite the town and everybody here to understand the other two pieces of this puzzle that are almost equally important. And the first is subsidence. This neighborhood has sunk a lot, and in my impression, we don't have good repeatable data about elevations, and there are ways to recreate past data using different methods. But knowing why, the reason we're having ponding is because these neighborhoods were built to drain water in rolled curbs, and it's settling differentially. So it's settling into low spots in some places and not in others. So understanding that subsidence is important. It could be many feet in some places. And the last thing that's come to light in a lot of communities lately is groundwater, because even if you build a structure at the bay, whether it's cement or a berm or whatever, there's hydraulic head out in the bay that's forcing groundwater into the neighborhood. And depending on how transmissive the soils are, that water can come up to the level of the bay, or at least nearly to the level of the bay. So we want to think about options that can control that, or at least start measuring what the attenuation is from bay levels inland, depending on how far you are. For instance, if you have an 8-foot tide, is it 7 feet of groundwater? Is it 6 feet? How far in does it go? It's a problem that can't be solved in a place like Florida because it's limestone and the water just goes through like a tunnel, so they can build all the berms they want. It's game over there because groundwater is going to get them. But we have options, and we have finer soils and more options for stopping that groundwater. So I just invite everyone to think about subsidence and groundwater as well. And it's a complicated 4-piece puzzle to get this right.
Okay, thank you. Manny, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I actually had more of a question for the city. So I think most of the folks here and on this panel would be interested. I understand there was a fair amount of pushback initially when creating this climate adaptation plan for Corte Madera that includes Mariners Cove. And I noticed that on that plan, there was a fair amount of kind of like permanently blank or purposely blank pages in that plan. Is there a plan to kind of re-include Mariners Cove in that? And I just want to see for everybody here, is that going to be included with this storm drain report? Is that a plan, or I think it's assessment now?
So I mean, we don't have any set timeframe or plan to update the climate adaptation assessment. We are going to have a storm drain master plan that will provide a different set of information. I think it's going to really dive more into the storm drain network and kind of model some of the things that are going on hydraulically with that, and also speak on some of the other things that are happening with tides and whatnot. So they're going to be complementary documents. A lot of the climate adaptation assessment was more of a planning tool, if you will. This has a lot more engineering. It's an engineering firm that's leading it. The other one was more of a sea level rise planning group and adaptation planning group with some supplemental engineering services. So it will come off as more technical, but I think in a lot of ways it'll be more useful in that way. And I'm not saying that we won't update the climate adaptation assessment perhaps at some point, but I don't have an answer for that at this point. I mean, I think what's most important is trying to identify the problems and find solutions. And if that document helps get us there, then we would use that. But if it's more effective just to pursue a project instead of pursue a plan update and then pursue a project, then we'd consider that as well. So
Yeah, thank you. That's very understandable. I think I had just basically moved into house initially when that was kind of coming up and there was a little bit of pushback going on, and it seemed like a lot of folks were basically looking at that climate adaptation plan, and that's why I brought it up. I understand not having to go back and rewrite it, but I think a lot of people utilize that as a stepping off point.
yeah, and just I think there was one in particular piece of misinformation, which I think was unfortunate and I think led to the data that we received, but it talked about 15-foot wall and it was, on one hand, it was talking about an elevation 15-foot wall, but never was talking about a 15-foot wall. So I mean, that really kind of changed the way it was received, and I think unfortunately that led to a lot of people signing the petition. And so we're going to try to get neutral responses here in 2023 by sending out that mailer. So
Perfect. Thank you.
David.
Thanks. In terms of funding, I just seem to recall, I believe this board was funded and founded based on a flood control tax. And then Measure G or something came around and that was rescinded. And it was my assumption that Measure G was going to be able to pay for projects like this. Is that somewhat on track?
So yeah, we were talking about Measure F.
F.
So and don't quote me on the exact dollars, but there was a flood tax, roughly $90 or $100 in a year paid by residents. And that was about what they estimate that locals are paying in terms of sales tax when they go buy their groceries and other things around town. But what's better now is that everyone who visits Corte Madera is also contributing in the form of sales tax. So we actually generate more money. So it provides more revenue than the flood tax from before. But it's not an endless supply of funds. And obviously there's a lot of priorities in town. So, certainly the town has funding, but there's definitely no clear decision or answer about to what extent it could fund a large scale project. And a lot of these are large scale projects, just on the client adaptation side, it's $50+ million worth of projects. And that's a big number.
Sachi.
A couple observations. One is, I think as Archie pointed out, the climate adaptation plan was a long range planning document. It's kind of let's say the 80 to 100 year kind of time frame, right? And I think the storm drain master plan is probably going to be more in the 10 to 15 to 20 year kind of horizon. So probably more appropriate. I would advocate for at least having consideration of these concepts in the storm drain master plan. Clearly this is a vulnerability. It's a problem, we're all living it. And so it should be part of that. And then in terms of the funding, I think that both an opportunity, I worked with Chris a little bit last year on trying to see if we could get some FEMA money for Lucky Drive. I don't know that particularly came to fruition, but I think there are opportunities. That this is what I do in my other work is doing funding applications. And so, I think there's potential to find kind of multi-benefits, because it's not just those of us on the shorefront, right? It's people impacted on the other side. It's traffic coming through. It's the school. So I think we can, articulate benefits that would perhaps set us up for some other funding and maybe some bigger funding. I know there's other topics on the agenda as well. and, maybe more community-wide, bigger project. And these are, even as to RJ's point, what seems like, yeah, you just dig it up and you put some berm in, it's like, it's not appropriate for a public agency to just kind of, wildcat it and go out. You just can't do that. I mean, my clients, I also a consulting engineer, are public agencies, and you just got to follow the rules. But I also think that there are opportunities to talk to the agencies and say, hey, here's what we're facing, right? We don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. I think we're trying to get to good or good enough. So I get the good enough may still cost, several $1 million, just because of the complexity. Even a bladder idea, you gotta tie it to some kind of foundation. So you're going to be, inflatable dams are tricky in just a different dimension. Right, you still got to tie it to a big concrete foundation. You're still dealing with bay fill, and so even a temporary project could be fairly complex. I've worked a little bit with inflatable dams before, so I think it's good though to get the ideas, because it means that people are thinking and they're concerned, and I think we invite that is to keep coming up with ideas, and what about this and what about that. And I get to say that engineers kind of be like, no, you can't do it that way, but we'll try to be creative about taking the ideas. So anyways, I'm here to help, and I obviously have a vested interest, and I think several of us do. So
Yeah, thanks, Archie. So looking at the whole scope of things that are asked about, requested, proposed, we have to think of what's feasible to do. The question about who pays for it, I was always looking at it more as a public-private sort of partnership. A lot of people in Mariner Cove that are on the water, have just over the years, such as myself, brought in 5 yards a year for 40 years to build up the backyard. And I have an elevated backyard that slides right into the wetlands. And that was my solution. That, is I've spent a lot of money doing that, but the house has been staying dry at this point. I was looking at the idea of the berm that was being asked for behind the houses as something of a public-private partnership, where the town would do the permitting and the engineering work on that. And then it would probably be an assessment district just for the cost of building this berm. That would be the responsibility of the homeowners, and it would probably be an assessment district. So you would be sure that it really worked, that it was designed to work and engineered to work and built as a continuum. And I think my understanding, the permitting and engineering cost would probably exceed the cost of a simple berm. And one of the reasons that I thought we should look at doing this in this particular area is that there was a lot of pushback about the climate assessment plan, and whether people that had never flooded, that had a backyard that was an elevation of 9 or 8, they didn't want to see a wall go in, and they don't need a wall at this time. We're talking decades out for, if the sea level rise predictions are true, they will have to have that. But here we have a part of the town that has tidal flooding with regularity, and homeowners that see that and live it, and I think are expressing an interest in doing something about it. Now, might have to pitch this public-private partnership, but I wonder if do you really need an easement to do that? Could this be done without this issue of the easement? Because we're, just, building a berm that's to last for the, period going forward, and also have it designed so that it could be added to if 20, 40, 50 years from now, sea level rise is a real problem and it needs to be added to. But I would sort of ask about that. The other thing that Mike Vogel has been asking for is just a seawall on the concrete pad that already exists around the sanitary pump station, and also try to fill in these channels that were created where you just have some extrusion technique of some impermeable material going down and blocking that, so it's no longer a straight pipeline, going out to the street. The other issue is if we could get that check valve to work, seeing what's wrong with the check valve in the storm drain system there that, just does not seem to slow the water down at all. And the issue of slot drains, that was primarily why the slot drains were done with the watersheds that had the biggest problem. And so currently this is the watershed with the biggest problem. And I think slot drains that would go just to the catch basins would solve a lot of the problems, because the tidal flooding comes in, and then because of this subsidence, and you end up with the ponding that stays there for days. But the slot drains would take that out. So those are some of the issues as I sort of get them from the concerned citizens that are living through this. And I've certainly observed it over the years. So if you want to respond to some of the thoughts that the board had, and then I'll open it up for the public for any additional comments.
Sure. So just kind of taking the comment about easements, right? So, okay, so hypothetically, someone constructs a perfectly engineered barrier. How's it getting maintained? How do you ensure that it stays for a long time? What is stopping someone from purchasing a property and being destructive with it? And whether this is an issue here, one of the common issues with levees, for instance, is gophers love them. And as you can imagine, gophers burrow and create holes. So they over time turn into Swiss cheese, and you have to maintain them. So how do you make sure all of those things are properly maintained and preserve that system without some sort of maintenance easement? Separately, the town, it's kind of going back to Sachi's comment. I mean, it's just you're just asking for trouble to do work on private property without all of the kind of liability coverages. So doesn't mean the folks that have those properties can't use it as if it were theirs at, when the project's done or whatnot, but to have no rights as a town to make sure that facility is built and maintained at the level that it was engineered to be, that opens us up to some serious exposure.
Would there be an option just to, inspect it yearly, have the town inspect it yearly without having it just as a easement? Because that just, to me, it seems like it just complicates the issue. Now, I realize that all of us that are on the water, actually, there is an easement back, behind the property, but,
Right.
It's not something that is accessed by
So
anybody.
the easement, I think you're talking about, Bob, I don't know if I can put it on the cursor, but it's actually the portion that's outside of the parcels shown, which
The parcel boundary.
Yeah.
is tons of wetlands. So then that's immediately impacts to wetlands, and has any permit agency is your number one rule is to avoid.
Oh, no, I'm not suggesting using that at all. I'm just using that as an example that
Mhm.
we do have an easement now. And, it may be that if you felt that it would have to have an easement to allow inspection and maintenance, then that could be part of the assessment district if the property owners were agreeable to that. I would like to think that they would like to see some resolution to the flooding problem that they're experiencing.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any project that's been constructed in that way.
Okay.
So I'm open to seeing it successfully done somewhere else, but it's not something I've ever heard of.
Mhm.
And it's just uncommon to how public agencies typically build infrastructure projects.
Okay, I was just thinking outside the box.
And then just on the gravel, I mean, I don't know if that's on, is that on private property? I mean, that is something that can be permitted without regulatory agencies. You could remove gravel and replace it with impermeable soils, and that's something we could issue a permit on pretty quick.
Well, I guess I was thinking of some of these programs that or engineering projects that I don't think would really work on our houses with subsidence, but other places they inject into the soil underneath the house to actually raise it up an inch or two, and it's just an impermeable material, and you're just trying to block that slot. And then the a 2-foot barrier, as Mike suggested, on the outside of the pad, would help keep a lot of the problems down, with the exception of what sort of leaks through the storm drain.
Yeah, I think likely if we're deflecting water, if we're creating water barriers, that it's kind of needs to go through the whole process.
What kind of process?
Yeah, we can't alter water course without doing some analysis from a compliance standpoint. So,
but it's on existing, concrete pad, that exists, that probably function, but it's settled so much at this point. It's not staying above water.
I don't want to get in a back and forth. I'm happy to show you some FEMA codes that speak to it. But yeah, it's part of what we all when we do we'll get to it later in our agenda. We do the CRS program, and we certify that we are not altering water in the floodplain in a lot of ways without the proper provisions. And so the whole program that gets us all discounts could erode if we are not complying with a lot of those codes.
Well, at one point we did have sandbags on the back of it. I don't think they went all the way around, but I think they were just across the back of it. Yeah.
I mean,
okay,
we can look at it. But yeah, I think I'm hesitant on doing anything without really doing the analysis.
Just what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So this is from my backyard. So this is the pump station here. So the fence that Mike Vogel was talking about is here, and then on his side, it's the same thing. That was trenched down. And so even though I've got fill and higher stuff here, that there's a low point where that fence is along this side and along, that's Mike's house there. And so it channels along that fence underneath.
Okay.
And so it was a problem that wasn't pre-existing, that was created with the way that pad was laid.
Okay.
When the new fence was put in. And I want to show you one more thing.
I'll open it up to the public again here, Mike.
He's gonna.
Let's get finished with this. I will open it back up. We're getting a little loose here. But is that something that you could look into as far as permitting a 2-foot barrier that would go around the pump station?
Yeah, we can look into that.
Okay. Let me open it back up for public comments.
I would like to show RJ this water flowing over and what I would request. So this is the back pump station. Right, my house is here, Mike's house is here. It just flows right through. Okay. You have concrete pads all over in that pump station. Okay. That's your front. That's Mike's house. My request is you build a 2-foot concrete wall berm. Now, I'm not saying a berm. You guys keep using berm. A mud berm is not going to help anything. As you said, it'll be destroyed in a year and a half. I'm asking for a 2-foot cement, 6-inch wide from this corner. I'd like to see it go from the front gate all the way down Mike's side, across this back, and then up to the front. Ideally, even better, even cheaper if you can't do the whole yard. But doing the whole yard is really what it needs. is do this back gate inside the fence line. Just build a 2-foot wall right on top of the cement that's already there. You're not going into BCDC. You're not going into anything other than you're improving your yard. At that point, what I'd like to see is then the city,
Then go back up to the mic there.
if the town can seal off that 25-foot, 50-foot section. And then you allow an easy permit process for Mike to build that wall at his property line, rather than having the contractor come or the inspector come out and say, no, you can't even put a fence there. That Mike build his 2-foot wall across his. I build a 2-foot wall across mine. Danny would put a 2-foot wall against his. I know Ally would do the same. We next move up to, I think it's Eric, and then it's Corinne and Mike, and then it's you. And if everybody paid for their 50-foot, 2-foot wide, or 2-foot high, 6-inch wide little foundation slab, and it's not a city project, and I don't know if I've got the least amount of money on the street, but try to figure out how to cover that cost. It's gonna be hard, but I figure out how to cover that cost. And if we get the neighbors to agree, and the city will lower the cost of doing it by permits and quick permits, that would go a long way. So my priorities are, because none of that's ever gonna happen, because I've lived there 26 years. I've seen the city work slowly. I understand it. I love where I live. I'm trying to get it that it's hard to do and expensive. Lot drains, number 1 priority. That's fast. You've done it in the rest of the neighborhood. That solved 270 days problem. A big catch basin there on the corner with a very low flow pump, even just a sump pump, to drain the sump, that basin back out into the drain that exists. Raise it up 12 feet and then pump it right back out the sewer. Low flow, doesn't have to be a high expensive thing. Fairly easy to do. You gotta dig a big hole in the street. And then I'd love to see that 2-foot wall, but I realize that's never gonna happen. And as far as the environmental wall, never, I'll fight against it forever.
Any other comments?
Yeah, so first off, I'm glad we're having this discussion. It's awesome. I've lived here for 6 years. I love where I live. It's great. RJ, I get that it's hard. I get that there's rules. I get that there's other permits and other pieces here. I think the board has had great ideas on how to move this forward. I'd love to see some progress, right? And I get that's hard, but it feels like hard is an excuse to not do anything. And I really don't want to see that be the case, right? Even if it's slow, even if we take, we fight it out one piece at a time, and we start making some progress, that would be fantastic. I think even doing these little pieces will incrementally make this better if we can't do a multi-million-dollar project where we do it all at once and it happens over the summer. Fine, what can we do? Right? And I'd love to see what we can do to actually make some meaningful movement, even if it's slow, and we start moving down. So I'd love to see that. Thanks.
I appreciate everybody coming this evening, voicing their opinions. They're giving us their experiences and thoughts on what can do. I'm gonna close that public comment and move on to the Moya Village levy.
We have one person online had their
Oh,
hand up too.
okay, I'm sorry.
James, you can unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted.
We hear you.
Hello. First, about the sales tax override money. That was originally put in with the promise that it would be used primarily to fund capital projects in the town. Okay. Council,
Yes.
is part of its responsibility, will decide how and when it is spent. Okay. But part of the original deal in passing the sales tax override was that we were going to basically repeal the flood parcel tax and use the override money to fund much, if not many, of the flood control projects. So in terms of who's going to pay for it, bottom line, it's the dollar amounts that it will cost to fix the problem. And, you know, how much of that can be paid for out of the sales tax override versus other sources. That will be up to the council to decide and the neighborhood to decide. Going back to my crazy idea of putting in bladders. One is one reason to do it is it's basically an experiment to isolate the impact of bay flooding. If we can put in a barrier for one or two winters to show that alleviates the flooding or reduces the flooding, it will give us a baseline for future project development, whether it's, you know, building a berm along the perimeter of the neighborhood, or, you know, if we put the berm in, then yes, we've got to put in pump stations and so on. So it's basically a way to sort of experiment with a possible solution that's not permanent. And I guess if I was trying to sell it to the local environmental agencies, that's the thing I'd mention to them, that it's sort of like non-permanent until we figure out how we can do an environmentally sound permanent solution that, you know, raising the perimeter of the neighborhood might solve, but we don't know for certain if it will solve it. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay.
Okay. Good comments on from everybody. I'm going to move on to Marina Village levy, unless we have anybody else online.
No, that's it.
Just want to say one last thing. I don't want hard to get confused with taken out of context. We're not saying we're not up for a challenging project, and by all means take one of these home. You'll see the pages and pages of products that we do, and a lot of them are hard. What I'm saying is it's our job to do the project right, that is best for the town, that puts the town in the least amount of liability, and therefore it does involve going through all those steps. So that's just the clarification I want to make. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care. Marina Village levy.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, we'll be discussing the Marina Village levy. So,
Chris, can you see if any of my friends and neighbors called in? Is there anyone else?
we have 9 attendees right now.
Okay.
Oops. Is back
Down to 7.
Okay, yeah, 7 now.
Please proceed.
Okay. So yeah, so we're discussing Marina Village levy. So here it's shown, the northern portion is shown in red. Up here, it goes around the detention basin and loops down to the start of the houses. And I just threw in this comment that yeah, the high tide in on January 5th, or no, yeah, it was January 5th. I was like 8.07 feet in Richmond. So that was pretty high, and it didn't overtop the levy as far as we know. So that's good news. Although I think there may have been a different storm surge here versus Richmond. So it's hard to say exactly how high it was, you know, after it got across the marsh in Corte Madera. So the county recently released some scenarios on marine maps that show basically different sea level rises, the effects. So I just snapshot a few of them to look at. So At 10 inches, Marina Village is still fine. There's no inundation. At 20 inches, it's showing water getting into the neighborhood, and obviously once it breaches the levee, it fills up. But this is, in this situation, it's assuming that the water stayed at 20 inches high and there were no pumps. So if that were the case, then, you know, this blue area is where it would be flooded. And you can see where it's showing the water entering seems to be down here. So, I mean, they based this on the LiDAR data that they gathered. So, I mean, it's pretty accurate. It's not 100%, but that indicates to us where the weak point is right now. And then,
So this is based on kind of static flows, that as if they're rising like a bathtub, and really there's no dynamic movements going on. So I think it's good info, but could be theoretical in some ways.
But you're also saying it assumes no improvement in the levee system over this time, that the existing levee system would fail. And that would be the place that it would fail first.
that's correct. Yeah, that's existing conditions are shown
Where
here.
did Meadow Sweet come from on this?
That's a great question. I don't know why that's on there. Yeah, it's right in the middle.
That's YOLO, just to orient people.
Yeah, that's weird. Maybe it thinks that's the neighborhood or something. I'm not sure. And then the third scenario is 10 inches of sea level rise with a 100-year storm. And obviously in this situation, there's several points where water is overtopping the levee. One is here, which we know is kind of the lower point on this north end of the levee. That's where the sandbags were placed previously. But also you're seeing, water entering here along these houses, and then here, and then this spot we saw before. So, yeah, so there's potentially a few areas that the levee could be shored up. And there was a report done in 2017 that focused just on the north portion, just to the edge of the houses here, and gave a bunch of different options for improving the levee and different ways to shore it up. So we have that already, which is good, but it didn't address the area to the south. So. And here's, this is the link to the Marin maps, shows all the different models.
Yeah, you should be able to get there by probably searching Marin County sea level rise viewer.
Yeah. Okay, that's the next one. So yeah, that's all I had. So are there any questions or discussion?
Is this
Gotcha.
also maybe going to be making its way into the storm drain master plan, or is it not related to that right now?
I know they're looking at this neighborhood, and I'm not sure how much they're going to be looking at the levees themselves, more so like the pump station and capacity of the storm system.
Well, I think Sachi, earlier on, you had some good assumptions, good points. I mean, really, we want to use that document to set some goals for what are our infrastructure goals for the next 10 or 15 years, right?
Yeah.
Comparing that to the planning document, the long range planning document, like this is what we have to plan for 50 to 100 years.
Right.
And so, we will be folding that into the discussion of the master plan, and kind of using some of the prior work about long range planning and sea level rise, and kind of having some next steps.
Yeah, because I think even to put it in as an idea, right, here's a potential future challenge, right? We've studied it enough to know that, this is the framework of where a solution might go, right? And kind of similar to, our part of Golden Hind is, and it may not be isolated to this part too, right? If you look along the creek, I don't know what other, challenges lay ahead, but it would be great to use it as a document, to at least document it and encourage future study, more study, right? What's the next step of, addressing it, right? And tying it into whatever the county's doing too, right? With, they're kind of thinking about sea level rise because it's not isolated Corte Madera. So just kind of linking into the broader whole would be, I think it'd be a great document. It's like, this is the chance to do it right now, right?
Yeah. Yeah, let's look at the weak links. David. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks for looking into this. I guess one observation or for clarity, that levee is already protecting the neighborhood. In fact, at King Tides, it's well above the elevation of Paradise Drive. You know, what would happen if the levee wasn't there to begin with? Two, I'm seeing, especially where you identified the breach point, seems very similar to the discussion we just had. That's someone's backyard. It's right on a, you know, is it possible to work with them to shore that up? And I know we don't have to do it today or tomorrow this year, but hopefully that's in your plan. That's all for now.
okay. Hey. Manny, any question? Yeah, the question that I have is there's an existing levee that you were talking about as the weak links there, that I think was created when Marina Village was initially developed in the 40s or 50s. And the question I've always asked is that a town easement? And is the town responsible for maintaining that levee? Or should the individual homeowners be responsible for maintaining that levee? Because, you know, clearly we're identifying it as the weak link, and the area on Mariner Cove number 5 that's on the creek, you know, it really isn't protected by a levee. That was always higher to start off with. And I think January 5th, water came in at the end of channel number 26. And they're actually proposing to raise and level the house and get it up to base flood 11. So, you know, the house will be protected. And it may well be that with that project, there's some landscaping that prevents it from coming in currently and flooding the street. But from the standpoint of Marina Village, you know, it looks like that northern levee, you know, we need to have a plan to raise that over time. And we need to address the levee behind the houses on Harbor as far as who's going to maintain that. And so those are my questions to you.
Yeah, I mean, just from an approach standpoint, you know, obviously we would need support from, you know, a lot of these parties to kind of start conceiving and working toward a project. We would want to do some more defined topographic survey work, because a lot of this is based on LiDAR data. So we could actually, you know, confirm what we're seeing here on this model prepared by the county. And then from there, it would potentially turn into an actual project that goes through the whole process. But those would be the initial steps. And again, you know, really, I think the annual survey mailer that we're intending to do, or not annual, the one we're trying to do this year, really, we're hoping to use that to build that support that I think was outshined in kind of some previous efforts, you know, and was kind of, you know, for many that were involved in that, we had a lot of support, but then it was kind of that petition that really kind of created some misinformation and kind of create a lot of opposition, and we'd like to correct that, and so that we can kind of, as a community, decide what makes sense, right?
So, yeah, but both these levees are existing levees, and you know, they're protecting Marina Village. And as we see in the projections, we need to do something to raise them up enough to continue to have them protect Marina Village. So as far as I know, there's never been any work done on really what's a continuous berm behind the houses on the creek from Harbor at Paradise all the way up to Mariner Cove, number 5, Edgemar Way. I've been paddleboarding back there, and it looked like it was a little over. I thought it was maybe a little over 9, but obviously a couple spots are lower than that.
And that this is one of the challenges where, if this isn't, I'm not aware of any easement back there. So, I mean, the town can't go in there and do any work without, getting the necessary permissions and land rights to do that. So,
Well, I mean, we're gonna, tell the citizens there that you can, do landscaping as long as you don't impact the wetlands. On the far side of the berm going down to the creek.
I guess the question is, and just, what assumes they're inclined to spend the money and take on a project of that magnitude for the greater good?
Well, to protect themselves, but they're obviously protecting, in this particular case, they're really protecting the homes across the street. So, it could be that this is a project that also is an assessment district, but the other, homes in the village also contribute to it. They may, contribute a greater amount, as they're immediately affected. But once the levee is breached, and if it erodes enough or long enough high tide, it can flood in there. Yeah, it's low.
So here's an idea for incentive for the town. I mean, hopefully this is worst case scenario, but I would ask the town to consider initiating some type of message to, as Dr. Bunny says, the houses along Harbor and elsewhere that, I mean, because looking at that, that's a lot of loss of property tax. I don't think the town wants to lose all that income from property taxes if they lose all that residential property.
So I know a number of jurisdictions all around Marin County for essentially wildfire mitigation have essentially implemented a grant of varying levels per the city, anywhere from $1,000 to some have put in 5 figures, a pretty substantial amounts. And that was a way of how we essentially mitigated this step from city versus private property. And the city basically applying a grant, assuming that they had some say in what was done up to a certain standard that was put in place per city code. And I think it was really effective. A lot of homeowners wanted to take the steps to mitigate the hazard. But obviously in like this situation where they have some sort of a wall or levee in their backyard that's now in their property, not an easement they have to take care of, it behooves them to take those steps. But sometimes that sort of incentive and kind of extrinsic reward, it would prove very effective. So it might be something to consider.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, and also in this scenario, we're seeing San Clemente Street flooded, as well as some of the properties to the west of that. And as we pointed out, that north-south levee connecting to the levee going around Marina Village, protects all of the flatlands in Corte Madera. We got our work cut out for us. Okay, anything else on Marina Village? Okay, Public Works accomplishments, 23 work plan.
Yep. All right, Chris is going to pull up the slides. It's also in your agenda packet. So really, I mean, the intent of this is just to share information. It's not to pat ourselves on the back, although there's some things here that I think are great for the town as a whole. But it's really just to show the extent of the work that really Public Works is involved with. And then also to show you what council has basically set as our 2023 work plan. So here is kind of some, this first set you'll see is kind of more general. You know, we have a lot of kind of regulatory responsibilities and other things that we support. As we move into projects, you'll see obviously we're building a new Corte Madera Town Hall. Keep going. Chris has highlighted a lot of the kind of flood control, or at least products that have flood control elements. So, you know, large project on Paradise Drive, Complete Streets. We just got $2 million in an OBAG grant that has an element of raising the road for consideration of future sea level rise. We're working on year 2 of the Storm Drain Master Plan. We'll be talking about the San Clemente Force Main Rehab. That's turning into a pretty big project. All sorts of other multimodal, and there's some climate action projects here as well, sidewalk pilot program, other things. We'll be launching an undergrounding, an effort that looks at kind of evacuation routes and some possible electrical undergrounding on Christmas Tree Hill. We'll be putting that out to designers here. Next slide. Some of these are items that came out of unexpected. We had some response to some algae blooms that really kind of drained some resources for a month or so last summer. You know, we're working on Town Park restroom. That's going to Planning Commission later this month. We've got vocal sports advocates that want higher conditions for the sports fields. We're making improvements on steps, lanes, and paths up on Christmas Tree Hill. You may have seen there's a big Caltrans project that's looking to retrofit the overcrossing here at Tamalpais Drive. We've had to do general repairs to various pump stations, you know, such as Golden Hind. Next slide. So that was kind of just some of the stuff that's gone in 2022, and I don't know if some of that was shifted around just the way it got laid out.
I think
okay, it came off
the
a little.
comments came off the first few
Okay.
things. Yeah.
So I mean, there's a lot of, you know, we're not a huge staff. We've got, you know, roughly 6 technical folks that are really pushing all of these. Plus we have our maintenance folks that back us up from an actual maintenance standpoint. So it's a lot that we're trying to tackle, and it's not that we don't want to take on more projects, it's that we just have limitations. So we have to prioritize, and these are the priorities that we've been set by council, really based on recommendations. So I mentioned some of these projects earlier. We talked about some of the slides, talked about you know, ongoing town hall. We're in year 2 on that. We're short, or we lost a project manager, so we're recruiting for another person there. Next slide, please. I think some of these I've mentioned prior, kind of going into further development of various projects here. And is there another page? And yeah, on the sanitary side, we're doing a large rehab project in Madera Gardens, amongst some other pump station upgrades and other things. So it's certainly a full plate. And we're excited about it. At the same time, it's gonna take a lot of time and resource to deliver this. What I didn't see listed and definitely was discussed was the getting that survey out to the shoreline neighborhoods to kind of get that rolling. And anyway, wanted to share this with you for any comment or answer any questions.
Nate, do you have any questions? Manny? Gotcha.
Oh, good job. You have full plate.
David?
No, thanks.
I was curious about the algae bloom in the lagoons, and was that something that more flushing would help? Because I know those aren't flushed during the summertime, as I understand.
Correct. So we brought in a WRA, an environmental consultant who could speak to the biology. We also brought in a company, Solitude Lake Management, that does management of water courses and kind of looked at options, and really the lack of, at least last year, lack of large precipitation events that really flush out those nutrients, that nutrient load led to just more nutrients in the water. And that led to just really Bay Area wide algae blooms. It was all over the news, just SF Chronicle, Marin IJ, all over. So it wasn't focused on Corte Madera in any way. That plus the warmer temperatures, the drought, everything just kind of was a perfect environment for these blooms. And so I'm hoping to see a different outcome this year, given we've gotten so much rain. So if everything that we heard last year is true, then that shouldn't be an issue this time around. But ultimately you have folks that live on lagoons that would like to not have it inundated with algae. And so we had a lot of discussions with them and pressure for looking at options. And there's a memo I'm happy to share. It might even be on our webpage, but it talks about some of the options. And really it's more along of, the most robust would be doing a full dredging project, which is a big, huge investment. They have some other ones, like they call it hydro raking, where you're kind of just sweeping a lot of the algae from the surface and capturing, as opposed to really actually hydro raking was like kind of scraping the bottom inches or two of the lagoon beds or the detention basin beds. And then they have one that's just kind of more cutting and pulling the kind of suspended algae. So those are all options, and there are various costs associated with them. And they were just presented to the folks that were interested about what options might be. And the town's kind of responsibilities that are kind of defined in some of the record documents is really about using that facility from a flood control standpoint. And really that's our defined use of those. And it's, although residents have a right to recreate, we're really not supposed to be performing functions in those outside of flood control. And so then the question becomes is there a flood control nexus to a dredging project, to any of these other things that might mitigate algae? And so that's something that we'll have our storm drain master plan consultant ask are the detention basins at capacity, or do they need to be dredged? And if they need to be dredged for a flood control standpoint, then there's a nexus to look at contributing town funds to that component. But if it's strictly to improve or reduce algae from a recreational standpoint, it's a hard justification to justify town funds for something like that.
Yeah, when the dredging was done on the Marquardt Lagoon 30-something years ago, I think it was 50-50 share with the town and with the homeowners. I guess they did an assessment district on it. Some people tried to do it on Lagoon 1, but they couldn't get the support to do that. So that's never been dredged as far as I know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
CRS update and discussion of annual flood mailer.
Yeah, so we successfully completed our 5-year audit. We hired a consultant, Tetra Tech, to assist us through that process. It was pretty time intensive. Jake Horwath, who was the project manager leading that effort, he's since moved on and working elsewhere, but there's a lot of documentation they want to see, and in particular there was something that I know we've relied upon or have put in value in this annual flood mailer. They had some specific comments on. And I wanted to talk with you all about how some of the additional information got into that document, because they're kind of saying that as previously formatted, this is the last year that they will accept it because they want to fit their template. They want less information really. And so we're going to walk through that and just kind of have a dialogue, because I know that's been something that the flood board has put time and effort into. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for the benefit of the new members, that, you know, it was somewhat of a template that Corte Madera, you know, had for themselves. And then the flood board members have reviewed it, you know, prior to going out and made suggestions, and also have had the names and contacts for flood board members on that, so that anybody in the community could send us an email.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that part's totally fine. And in general, I mean, I don't fully understand why this information is having additional. So the highlighted information is what they've asked us to remove on future versions. I don't know that it really is hurting anything, but it's.
I think on this one, actually, the highlighted was added, but on the next mailer, the red highlight is everything they've removed, which is quite a bit. So,
okay. All right.
Yeah.
If you can walk us through that.
Let's see. So yeah, this is touching on the storm drainage special tax in 1998, which they're saying will run until 2023.
I think we should go to the final version just so we can see.
Okay, I think this is
out of it.
This is a different document. I'm not really sure, but so this is the flood mailer. So we used to have two. We'd send out one for people in the flood zone, one outside, and now they've just gone down to one. And so everything in red they're removing. So it's quite a bit of information.
Is this like an 11 by 17 folder? Is like front back like 4 pages total? I don't know, because I've
Yeah, it's
gotten it.
4 to 6 pages.
Yeah.
Is there any reason to like put this information into something that's not what FEMA sees? I mean, because it seems like, you know, you're always educating people, especially people.
Yeah.
Did you do an addendum, non-FEMA addendum or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we were to consider anything and anything is just going to involve staffing resources, but we would have some sort of link to a web page that has supplemental information.
Mm-hmm.
But now this removal is being mandated by FEMA.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, they sent us a specific letter saying that
Yeah.
we've reviewed this to get credits per activity, whatever number it was, but as a heads up, we won't be accepting it in this format in future years.
So yeah, there's a lot to go through, but I was just going to skim through. We can provide the edited document to everyone as well after the meeting.
Yeah, so I mean, we can post this on the flood board webpage and welcome any comments. But in general, we were kind of just looking for, you know, is that an acceptable approach? Take what we think. You know, obviously we got to comply with FEMA. So to get everyone to concur with that, and then separately, we'll try to take the other useful pieces and find a home for them on a web page somewhere and link them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Oh, they really just, well, you're gonna get yourself down to like 3 pages.
Yeah.
Could be on a postcard.
The other thing to be aware of is we used to send out 2 mailers, one for those in the floodplain and one that's out. This now comes down to 1 document, 1 concise mailer.
Do we send a mailer out to people in the WUI?
We send out townwide.
Townwide.
Yeah, but prior, if you weren't in the floodplain, you would get one
Yeah.
set. And then if you're in the floodplain, you get another. Now everyone will get the same flyer.
So there'll be a flyer for FEMA and a flyer for the WUI and.
No,
one.
it'll just be one FEMA flood related flyer. I don't know that this has much in terms of WUI information.
Oh, I was thinking you could
Oh.
add that to make just one mailer for everybody. And so it'd work whether you're in the flood zone or in the WUI. Or in between.
Yeah, they may mix that there too, right?
I think we're kind of stuck with just, they've made it clear they want something, so we got to give it to them and then.
Yeah.
Useful information.
No map. I know it seems like shows who's in the floodplain. Helpful, but remove that. And then these are the last 2 pages.
Wow.
So yeah, it's pretty bare bones after this, but that's what FEMA wants apparently. And then so you're saying, and this is the last year we have a custom one, and then in future years FEMA will give us.
No, we'll need to send out. So we've held back sending this out because we wanted to talk with you. So this will be going out probably very soon,
Yeah.
the stripped down version. And then meanwhile, we can try to find a way to link the additional information on our webpage somewhere.
Huh. Very interesting. We're stuck, you know, they got us over a barrel.
But yeah, we'll put it up there either way on our webpage. And if you all want to provide any comments about things that you definitely want to see, or you can just wait till we find a new home for it and we can send you that link.
Yeah, I mean, if we're not editing it or working on it or trying to improve it, then, it is what it is.
Well, we can send out once we create a website, we can send that out if you want to review that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other option, and maybe this is even less effort for staff in a way, but this is, you send the FEMA version out via mail to comply with them, and then you keep the full one in its entirety on an email on a project web page or something.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, yeah, it would be hard to kind of make sense of pieces.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay. Should we move on to project updates?
Yep. Okay. Sorry, one second.
Pump station repair, San Clemente.
Yes. So we've discussed this project a few times. It was a project that kind of fell in our laps. With the pump station outfall pipe becoming a leak and creating a sinkhole. And so we hired Schaff and Wheeler to design a repair. So they've been continuing to work on the design to repair the outfall pipe. And they've considered several options to looking into it because, as always, once you start digging in, it gets more complicated. So they were at first trying to see if we could reuse the old manifold and recoat the inside and the outside. And that started to get very expensive because they're going to have to take it apart and then truck those pieces to a warehouse where they do add the coatings, bring it back, put it all together. So they looked at that option versus just removing everything and replacing it with HDPE. And it honestly wasn't a huge price increase to use HDPE. And that will prevent us from having to add coatings in the future. So there's a lot less maintenance. We don't need cathodic protection on it, which was the whole reason that, we're in the situation we're in because the cathodic protection failed and it started to rust. So yeah, I mean, it looks currently like the best option and it's definitely a cost increase on the project. But it will be a huge benefit as far as maintenance in the future, because ever since this pump station was built in '87, every 10 years, we've had to come back and do some major work on it because something's gone wrong. So
Yeah, so the big two kind of main things, right? We've got steel custom manifold that needs to be coated about every 10 years. And then separate that, we have ongoing settlement. So the pump station itself is not settling if and possibly just a little bit, whereas as the pipe goes into the ground, that's settling at a reasonable rate. So it keeps wanting to drag it down. So we have to get these highly specialized couplings that are in a very large format. 54-inch pipes that are very expensive and have 40-50 week lead times. And the project cost by going to the plastic manifold, it did add, $500,000 to $700,000, about a quarter of the project costs. But we think it's really going to be a much larger service life. I think it's that component alone. The settlement has its own issues that we're designing around, but this should be a project that lasts much longer, before we have to come back, hopefully 30 plus years as opposed to 10.
Okay, questions? Big problem.
Yeah, just roughly, what is that recoating cost? Was that every 10 years? What was that costing?
Well, the last time they did it, they had to replace the entire manifold. So
Yeah.
we haven't even coated it since then, but
Okay.
they, and back in the 90s, you could do it in the field, and now
Yeah.
you have to take it apart and take it somewhere else to do it. So
Yeah, no, it sounds like plastic's the way to go in that kind of aggressive environment.
yeah,
Mhm.
it'll help with the weight too a little bit.
Right.
So that's
Mhm.
And, with stormwater, you've got debris mixed in. So, and you've got these bends. So you're kind of pumping and projecting stormwater against these bends. And so your coating can deteriorate potentially even faster in certain localized spots. And then from there, it just corrodes the whole thing a lot quicker. So with HDPE, we don't have to have that concern. So
What's the wall thickness of the pipe?
I don't know off the top of my head.
it's
Gotta be
it
thick.
may, yeah,
I'm-
it's maybe 1 to 2 inches on each side. It's really thick.
But is there any concern with, I mean, I guess it's the same pitting concern with like having sands and stuff thrown against that pipe wall, right? So you're not really changing out that.
Right. And that was a question that we asked the designers is, that same debris gonna
Mhm.
kind of wear off HDPE, and they've said that it actually performs really well over time. So.
And we were originally trying to start this project this year because obviously there's a risk if the pipe starts leaking again, it'll create a new sinkhole and we'll have to do another emergency repair. But because of these parts, we need to get the flexible joints that can take the amount of settlement that they're projecting. It's going to be a long time to get the parts. So we're looking at probably building it in early 2024.
Yeah. So we're still planning to bid this in the next 2 months and just start the process, get the contractor, get the parts ordered. But we probably will do a lot of waiting for parts to show up before we can actually do the install.
Just a future suggestion, if you end up encountering that, and I'm working on a project right now where we're doing owner furnished equipment, right? So you pre-purchase and pre-procure some long lead items, because we're looking at like transformers are like 100 weeks.
Yeah.
So strategies for the future.
Yeah, we obviously looked into that. On the sanitary side, we did get burned by that a few years ago, because if anything goes wrong with those parts, the contractor that installed them doesn't want to stand behind them. So it comes with challenges. Were you also going to talk about the change in the manifold elevation, or?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the HEP manifolds set up slightly different. So the way it is now, the 3 pipes come out and then they dive underground and then they are combined underground. Here, as you can see in this top spot, all 3 pipes come together, and then the one larger pipe will dive under and then eventually connect to the existing concrete pipe that goes out to Paradise and then outfalls in San Clemente Creek. So It's a little bit different setup. We'll have to extend the fence to contain this, this new manifold. But, yeah, we still thought it was a better.
So a little more investment in these kind of elevated structural supports, but in terms of access and maintenance of those parts, it'll actually be easier in the long run. And you won't have, yeah, because those pipes will converge above ground before the one pipe goes under.
And then these are the 3 flexible joints that are the very expensive, hard to get parts. So.
As well as the one here, down at the bottom,
Oh, the manifold or the,
this one.
oh. Yeah. That's right, yeah. The connection to the.
So as I look at that, as the main pipe subsides in the future, you can actually monitor it by seeing the, I guess, stretch on the flexible pipe.
Yeah, I mean, the HDB pipe will be slowly dropping and these flexible joints will bend with it. And I think we presented this before, but they're expecting 27 inches of settlement, future settlement. So definitely should be able to see it over time. I think that was over 50 years maybe. So
Yeah.
Half an inch a year.
Wow.
Yeah, so right now, if you look at the side of the building, it's because it's one rigid piece and these parts aren't designed to flex, they're just dragging the building down and you can just see cracks in the CMU wall.
Yeah.
yeah, it's there's not much structure left on the front side of the pump station. So we're gonna have to fix that too.
All right. More bad news.
Oh, that's wrong.
Lucky Drive Culvert. That's
Yeah.
an additional topic.
No, that was just a typo.
Okay.
Meant to be San Clemente.
So future agenda items? Dave? Got you?
Maybe on the storm drain master plan, kind of like what kind of projects are out of it, maybe? That would be a.
Yeah, just an update, I guess, on the,
Update, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like it's, when is that scheduled to be done?
It'll either be end of this year or early 2024.
Okay, so next meeting isn't month, so that may still be.
Yeah, we'll see if there's anything worth discussing or presenting kind of on the progress side of things.
Yeah, if there isn't a lot on the agenda, we've passed on it to let them take care of their day job.
Yeah.
Nate, do you have any comments?
Yeah, around sea level rise and flooding. As we restart the conversation with the community about what to do about some of those issues, I think one of the best things for conversations is making sure everyone's using the same data, the same elevations, things like that. And I had mentioned the 4 pieces of the puzzle, the sea level, inland flooding, subsidence, and groundwater. And it would be good eventually to have perhaps a town maintained website that had links or data sources. So we're all talking about the same stuff. It's simple as links to the Richmond tide gauge, basic understanding of the datums that are used, links to the sea level rise projections that we have to use through the state, things like that. But just so that there's a single location where that data is located and things that we're not sure enough about aren't on there. So people understand we're not sure yet about groundwater. That's why we don't have any links here. But that's something to discuss, I think, for the future, is having that common kind of data center for assessing those issues.
Manny?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Good.
The one thing that I would like to know is in Mariner Cove, Chris, you told me over on Channel they'd put in a check valve, and I wasn't aware of that at all. I mean, because it didn't seem like there's a check valve in there. But if you could just update it, well, I think it would also be good to go through and look at all the check valves now that we're having a little bit of a dry spell, just to make sure there isn't debris that's impeding their function. But, you know, if you could just, you know, give a list of all the check valves that are currently in place.
Yeah, we could definitely do that.
Okay.
And we've been having issues with them, so there's lots to report on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
One quick item before we close up, if I may, and then it sounds like David has one. Just want to give an update on what's going on with the emergency ordinance surrounding exceptions from the Brown Act. So as of the end of the month, we're basically back to pre-pandemic Brown Act requirements. So blood board members, to be a acting member at a meeting, you need to be in person. I think there's special circumstances where if you have we can send out some information on a medical condition that you can't be here. You're allowed, I think, 1 per year where you can still attend and virtually. But basically, if you aren't able to be here in person, you don't fall under that exception. You can still attend virtually, but you will be a member of the public. You won't be able to speak in your turn as if you were sitting here today.
Okay.
So
Got it. Anything, Dave, final comment?
Yeah, can you tell us how to get our emails back running?
Yeah.
There's a IT number that I'll forward that to you.
Okay.
That they can walk you through it. They got to get you a new password. Meeting adjourned.